Good morning. This is Al. Here we are in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at the Kelly Writers House. We're very, very excited. Well, I haven't consulted with anybody about this yet, but I'm very excited. I didn't get much sleep. I think Anna stoked my coffee with caffeine this morning. Is it possible? Because I'm feeling a rush.
It would be very foolish for me to do so.
This is going to
I've learned my lesson.
This is going to be a disaster. So I'm going to talk really fast. We're going to have about an hour and 15 minutes, I promise. Not an hour 20, but an hour and 15. This is a really exciting one because we get to talk about the influence of Whitman and Dickinson before we, in week 3, chapter 2, begin to get into modernism, which is really the heart of this course. So this is still a preamble, and it's just I just find it really fun. I've been delighted by the way in which people coming back to Rae Armentrout's difficult poem, The Way, those people who are reading it for a second year or a third year, so many people are saying this difficult poetry takes time. You just need to come back to it. You have to live with it, which is, I think, maybe somebody would agree here at the table. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm glad I specialized in poetry and that I live with poetry every day, because it's the thing you can keep coming back to and get more from, as opposed to, oh, I don't know, I could think of some movies that I've seen recently where you walk out thinking, I've seen this movie and I really don't have to do it again. To what extent, Lily, do you agree with that idea that poetry is something you can live with a long time?
I agree, and I think there's something about maybe it's not like all poetry, but maybe there's just something generally about a conventional narrative, like something that has a beginning, middle, and end that comes to a conclusion within the work itself.
Yeah.
So that would be like the cheesy movie or something that you would say, okay, I saw it and I don't really need to see it again.
Right.
But if something doesn't come to a logical conclusion within, but like you don't get carried from something from beginning to end, then you, like many of the, or most of the poems in this course, then you kind of feel compelled to keep coming back because you know it's kind of up to you to keep searching for, although maybe never like find that way to conclude.
Yeah. Like any process or journey, you know, poetry is more like the process and journey of life. We're going to do this in week 10 when we deal with Caroline Bergthal's poem. Poetry can be more like the way life is. One progresses through life and one's intellect changes and one's ideas change and one's personal life changes. And what a colleague of mine and a friend of mine, David Wyatt, who's a wonderful scholar of modern American writing, mostly novels, calls the fate of rereading. And the fate of rereading means that there are two things that are moving in time. There's you through your life, gaining experiences and suffering losses, and then there's this text that is not still, but is actually moving in time with you because it's changing in response to its readership. And when we have this kind of 2- or 3-dimensional dynamism, we're then realizing that literature is part of life, or that it's like life. And I think if ModPo is committed to anything, it's introducing this idea that readership, that the state of being a reader, is not a static thing. It doesn't need to be a static thing. All right, well, so we have here in the audience, maybe Zach will turn the camera on them, we have Mary and Andrea and Lexa and Kirby and Michael, who's doing sketches. It was Michael who did that great sketch last time. Really great. And CJ is here. And Herb is here, and we have at the phone, we have Anna Strong. Good morning, Anna.
This is my phone.
That's your phone.
Call me, please.
215-573-9752, 215-573-9752. We have back there Mr. Webcast. I mean, he is now, ModPo is the MOOC that's doing regular live webcasts, interactive webcasts, and it's really Chris Martin who's become, I know we're all going to regret saying this, but he's become nationally and internationally known in the MOOC community. Yeah, they're laughing, but it's actually true. When people need to figure out how do you pull this off, Zach's the one they call. Of course, the answer is it's like Fibber McGee's closet. This is extremely intuitive. This is not counterintuitive. You just put wires and It's crazy, and he's really great at it. Thank you. And Zach Gardner, and we have coming in, and then to my right, and here's a phone call. We have coming in here to my right here in the room, and your left, I guess, the amazing Lily Applebaum. Good morning. You've already heard from Lily. And to my left and your right is my co-conspirator, my colleague here at Penn, a wonderful poet in her own right, and a good friend, Julia Block. Good morning, Julia.
Good morning, Al.
And we have coming through Google Hangouts, we have Dave Poplar coming to us from Massachusetts. Say good morning, Dave.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. And Emily Harnett in New Haven. And Emily, how's your sound?
I think it's working.
Oh, fantastic. So coming in from the state of Connecticut, another blue state. And we have New York, another blue state. Too many blue states associated with ModPo. We have Erica Kaufman, whom I had the delight of seeing twice this weekend, really 3 times, the third being our effort to get to a poetry reading in Brooklyn, which didn't work out for me. Good morning, Erica.
Good morning, Al.
Are you in New York City or up in the Hudson Valley?
I'm back home in the Hudson Valley.
Okay, I like the way you said home there. Another blue state. And finally, the biggest blue state of all, California. Molly O'Neill in Los Angeles. Good morning, Molly.
Good morning, Al.
How are you doing?
I'm great. It's very early, but I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to see you. And while I see Molly and happy to see her, I just want to plug a meetup. And we will be meeting in Los Angeles on Saturday, this coming Saturday at 11 a.m. local time. And Molly, do you remember the name of the cafe or wherever it is we're meeting?
Yeah, it's Wanderlust Hollywood at Highland and Sunset.
Highland and Sunset. And I might even kiss a sunset pig. That's a quote from Joni Mitchell. Don't get mad at me. And I don't know what she was referring to, a policeman or a lousy guy? Policeman. Okay. Another Californian. Someone else reporting in from a blue district.
Can this webcast just be Julia talking about Joni Mitchell?
We can do that.
Yeah.
Great. And Jason has just arrived. Good morning, Jason. And he's got the portable mic. He's stealing the portable mic. That's great. Okay. In a few minutes, Anna is going to plug meetups in general. So, but let's go to the phone call first. Who is it?
It's Philip Drexler calling from Austin.
Oh, that's great.
Yay! Hopefully not a thunderstorm this time. Let's hope.
Bill, can you hear me?
Yeah, well, it's beautiful today, but Austin is the one bright blue spot in a sea of red.
Well, Bill, so how are you doing? What's ModPo like for you so far?
Oh, it's great, Al. You know, I'm going to talk about one of the new poems you put up on ModPo Plus. The new stuff's great.
Great.
And since I'm planning to go back to school to get a teaching degree, I'm looking at some of the old videos and critiquing them pedagogically, and I'll get to learning a lot from them.
That's great. I like all of that.
Western Trails, Pat State.
Yep.
Transfer for.
Still there?
I think, Bill, somebody's trying. Are you working on a work phone, an office phone?
No, sir, I'm on the bus.
Oh, it's the bus.
I'm on the bus.
And he never returned. And he never returned. It's the Massachusetts mass transit system. What do we call that? The T.
The MTA.
Well, that's great. The MTA. That's right.
Yep, that's it.
All right.
So anyway,
this is real competition. Bill, can you tell us which poem in ModPo Plus you'd like to talk about? And then you'll probably have to hang up in case the MTA decides to interpret the poem through an automatic, non-intentional intervention.
Well, Al, I actually posted a thread on the general discussions that they have poetry on the bus here in Austin, supplied by our local poetry society. Wonderful idea. Anyway, the poem I was talking about is the one by I believe it's a Korean author, Sanghi Park.
Hannah Sanghi Park, yes.
Right. And so we've been talking about that one in the forum a lot. And the thing that I didn't hear y'all talk about a lot in the video was that all of us seem to agree that that is a deliberately subtle, subliminated form letter, if you will, of rage, either toward a man, the man, or men in general.
Okay.
And that's what's coming through on the forum, so I'd like to hear what you all
Great.
think about that.
Thank you, Phil. Would you do me a favor and hang up and listen on the bus to our response so we don't have to deal with MTA? Thank you. Thank
Absolutely.
you. And hello to Austin.
Yeah.
So Philip Drexler is calling us from Austin, Texas, and he's asking about, this is an unusual thing because usually we mostly talk about the poems in the main ModPo syllabus, so we'll be real brief about this one, but we want to encourage everyone to go to ModPo Plus once in a while, and if you click on ModPo Plus and then you go to week 2, you'll see a brand new poem by Hannah Sang-hee Park, who has published a book called, I think it's called The Same Different, and she's a new poet. This is her first book, and it's called Dear Sir. And I'll just read the final 4 lines of it and respond to Phil, and then we'll go on to the next question. Well, Dear Sir dash puts us in mind of Emily Dickinson, I believe, so it's like a response to perhaps some gentleman who might have greater power than she, who's beyond her poetry. But she ends this dense, perhaps Armentroutian poem, or Dickinsonian poem, with the following line. No, nothing's worth the strife and fire, the end as dash as in unhyphen, the end as the on and on. Now, Lily has not seen this poem before and was not in the video, but maybe the two of us together can just say a thing or two about it. Do you want to start?
So I think we'll just starting with the first sentence that you read. No, nothing's worth the strife and fire, period, is sort of it's a command, but the command to know something is a strange one, because if you command someone to know something, you can't, that's not really how knowledge transference works. Like, it's a strange way to start. So no, nothing's worth the strife and fire, or it's like a colloquial, you've got to know.
So one reading is, please know that nothing is worth this crap, this struggle. It also has embedded in it the phrase, know nothing. It's not hyphenated, but she's playing the way Armentrout and Dickinson do. She's playing on know nothing, so not being someone who knows nothing would be positively worth the strife and fire. And then the end as the on, and that's such a Dickinsonian, Armentroutian idea. Julia, any first thoughts on it? Because you probably haven't seen it either.
No, I haven't, but you see that dash after and it's kind of a hyphen because un is a prefix, but it also looks like an Emily Dickinson dash. It does everything that dash is supposed to. It opens it up, it's ongoing, it doesn't finish. Also appears at the end of the line.
So it could be the end is as unending.
Yeah.
You know.
And then that very last line, the on and on, kind of like a different way of just describing ongoingness.
Yeah.
And the idea of an end being ongoing is an interesting contradiction.
Yeah. Hannah Sang-hee Park, and the poem is called Dear Sir, and it's available in ModPo Plus. So thank you, Phil, for calling. And Anna, do we have someone on the phone?
Oh my gosh, it's Joe Massey.
Joe Massey calling from Massachusetts somewhere. Put him up. Joe, good morning.
Good morning, Al.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good.
Finally fall here, and yeah, it's beautiful.
For those who don't know, Joe Massey, the poet, has been joining us this week. So if you haven't been to the forums, or you've been very selectively to the forums, you may not be aware that Joe has joined. This is a special week in which Joe is joining us, and he's talking about Sid Corman. So if you go to the sub-forum on the Sid Corman poem, It Isn't for Want of Something to Say, Something to Tell You, Something You Should Know, you go there and watch Joe interacting with dozens and dozens of ModPo people. So, and here he is calling us. Joe, what's it been like so far? Have you ever done anything like this?
I've never done anything like this. I've never taken a MOOC class, and I'm taking the whole ModPo class, and it's been such a pleasure. And talking to so many people at once about Sid Corman's work, that's never occurred before. Sid has been kind of a secret. He seems like a secret for so long, and now his work is being exposed to, I guess, thousands of people. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great delights about putting Corman in ModPo and then in the main syllabus for one little poem, of course he wrote thousands, as you say, just the sheer delight of seeing people's very, very strong, passionate, and positive response to this remarkable poet. Can you say, you know, very briefly how you got to know Sid and what it was like interacting with him?
Well, I used to hang out in the University of Delaware library when I lived in Newark, Delaware, and I found Laurie Niedecker just kind of randomly in an anthology, and I picked up her book from this condensory, which was an early attempt at a collected by the Jargon Society, and it listed Sid's name as her literary executor and gave his address in Kyoto, Japan. And I looked him up and started reading his work, and I just wrote to him. Didn't expect a response, and within a week or two, I got one of his blue aerograms from Japan. And
classic Sid Corman blue aerogram typed.
That's right.
You know, and I have a couple of those, and they're just keepers because he would really work on those letters, wouldn't he?
Yeah, well, he was such a prolific correspondent. It was just like, you know, just like eating or breathing for him, right? Corresponding. I think it was just an essential part of his practice. And yeah, so we corresponded from 1999 when I was, I guess, 19 years old until his death in 2004. And he was my mentor. He was a dear friend as well.
Joe, many of us have had the privilege of hearing you read your poems and reading them. The new book is called Illocality, is that correct?
That's correct.
Illocality. I recommend it to everybody listening. I'm going to ask you two more things, and then you have to go, and we're gonna move on. I know you have to go because we talked about this before the show today. So the first question is, what effect could Sid Corman have if poets today would get to know his work, or what effect does he have on you? Either one of those or both.
Well, I think first and foremost, it would be a focus on the line as a syllable by syllable thing. Sid wrote in syllabic verse, and so he was very keyed into the sense of sound in the poem, but in a sort of micro-tonality kind of way. And I think a lot of poets today don't really have an ear, and I think Sid maybe you know, help give them one.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you. Now, so my final question for you is simply to respond. We're going to play "It Isn't for Want," which has become a kind of anthemic poem for ModPo, and then you can react to it any way you want. All right, and then you can get off to your busy morning. And in advance, thank you for spending the rest of the week in the forums, and I urge anyone who is listening to this and wasn't aware that the poet Joe Massey is in our forums as a guest poet, I urge you to go and find him and talk to him. He's been very, very responsive. Okay, I don't know how well you're going to hear it, but we're going to hear it in the room, and it should come out. This is Sid Corman reading "It Isn't for Want." The sound was coming into this room many years ago. Sid was ill, but still very much with us, calling from Kyoto, Japan, and we recorded it here in this room. Here it is. "It Isn't for Want." Oops, that's the text. And, sorry. Here it is.
All right. It isn't for want of something to say, something to tell you, something you should know, but to detain you, keep you from going, feeling myself here as long as you are, as long as you are. Something.
Sorry, I wound up repeating it. Joe, any response to that poem? One question might be, why are we all so addicted to it? What's the power of that?
Well, I think it opens a dialogue between the poem and the reader. It's constantly generative in that it leaves a wide open space. There's no real conclusion. It's I love that about Sid's work. It's always sort of open-ended and invites the reader in to have a conversation. And it was beautiful to hear Sid's voice. I talked to him on the phone a couple of times when I was a kid, and I charged it to my parents' phone bill because it was a phone call to Japan, and I got in a lot of trouble, but it was worth it because he was just so generous and such a beautiful voice too.
Yeah. Joe Massey, thank you very much. Can we all give Joe Massey our thanks? And this is a model for the kind of thing that we can do in this massive open online course, which is to invite poets who've been influenced by some of our poets in the syllabus to convey, well, first of all, to give you access to working poets, and also to convey the impression that we think that the work we're doing here is continuous, that there is a continuous tradition. Thanks, Joe. Have a great day.
Thank you, Al. See
all right.
you in January.
Yeah, he's coming back in January. That's great. Thank you. Julia, something in the forums that you want to put on the table so we can get some responses from the TAs in the Google Hangouts?
Yeah, Mark Drexler started off an interesting discussion. He simply asked, how long did it take you to appreciate the way? And a couple of people have chimed in. Richard Smith says, I liked it immediately. Molly says it took her about 4 years to appreciate it. And then we've got a couple of other people, or at least one other person chiming in and say, it's not me, I don't get it, it seems incoherent, it makes no sense. So I think we should talk a little bit about the way.
Great. If you're in the Google Hangout and you want to say something about the way, just lift one little finger so that I know you want to talk. Nobody's doing it yet because we're on a little delay. Nobody's still doing it. Okay. So one of us start here, and then I'm going to call on Dave Poplar, so get the way out, Dave. The question is, I guess the broader question is, how do you live with a poem like that? When does it occur to you? You know, is there a eureka, etc.?
I actually talked about this in my office hours this morning with a couple different people, and I think, I'm forgetting now, someone asked, is this the voice of God talking? Like a very specific question. And my answer was kind of like a way to, if you're going to try to read the poem and think of it as one continuous speaker, you're going to be extremely frustrated and just like only focusing on what doesn't make sense. Instead, so I think for me the key is like thinking of all the possible scenarios and people that I, in the different stanzas, could be at different times, and like just learning how to read, basically learning how to read continuous sentences as disassociated from each other.
That's really well put, Lily. And so just to summarize what I think Lily just said is you have to learn to live with the fact that some of these poets are not writing from a stable subject. They're going to write a line from a subject that seems to be them, but then they're going to be reproducing words they've overheard, so that subjectivity gets spread out, and it is a very difficult thing for any of us to read and accept that that might be the case in language.
Yeah, the example that we talked about in my office hours was the first stanza, Card in Pew Pocket reads, I am here, something like that. And someone said, well, it could be like a prayer card at a funeral, or it could be, I said it could just be some kid wrote I am here, like scratched it into the back of a pew. So it could, like, instead of thinking of the sentence in the poem as summarizing exactly one experience, think of it as like a place where there could be multiple possible experiences.
Let's broaden out the question for Dave Poplar, putting Dave on the spot. What comments do you have, and maybe cheerleading, encouraging comments to novice readers of difficult poetry, supposedly difficult poetry? What do you recommend people do about the problem of it taking a long time to get this kind of poetry? Dave?
I really like what Lily said about this, and I think I look at this poem, it's almost like a collection of Easter eggs to open up and discover, and I think it's fun to start to embrace that sort of thing. And that's why this poem, especially this poem, for me, it takes on more and more and more meaning the more I read it. So how long did it take me? It's still taking me. I'm still discovering more from it. And I think that's one of the cool things about poems like this that aren't narrative, that don't sort of lend themselves to one overarching interpretation. This has a lot of things, but at the same time, you can still take a step back and try to read it as one vibe, one thing. So I mean, I think this poem especially lends itself to a whole lot of different things. For a whole lot of, I mean, you can read it for years and years and years and still get more out of it.
Erica Kaufman, some of us would make a large claim about the importance of not having a settled response to a first reading, or having a poem or a kind of poetry force you to live with it for years, live with that open-endedness. Some of us would claim that there is a poetical or ethical dimension. Some of us would even claim there's a political dimension because of the impact it has on general public discourse if we're allowed to leave things open and we have to live with meanings that are not settled. Do you want to take that bait and say anything, presuming you agree with that? Do you want to say anything about the importance of that?
I do. And I do agree with all of the things that you were saying, and I could be misremembering, but I feel like there's an essay in which Rae Armentrout is writing about clarity and whether or not, is clarity connected to readability, and if so, does clarity simply reinforce problematic social codes or roles? And I think that one of the things that I love about poems like this, where each time I read it I feel like I see the poem differently, is it never lets language get too familiar, which means that you're always in touch with the way that the world is shifting and changing around you. So there is no one way.
Yeah, beautiful. While I'm gonna turn to Emily, Max, and Molly for very brief responses to a version of that question. But while I'm doing that, I wonder if Andrea would like to join us at the table. We have an extra mic, and Julie, maybe you can move that chair for her. Emily, Max, and Molly, I guess the version of this question I want to ask you is, let's talk about not academics or the poetry world so much as life, the way you or we. The way you would like to live it. Is that consonant with this concept of encountering a text where the meaning is unfixed, where it has to dawn on you over time? If you recommend that as a way of living, what would you say about that? I mean, some people would just say, oh, I would much rather have clarity. I'd much rather understand what the meaning that's being conveyed to me so I can put it to use in my life, rather than be driven crazy by the open-endedness of something and the ambiguity and unclarity. I sort of know where you come down because you're all devoted to this, to lives where things are not settled. That didn't quite come out right. But so, Emily, do you have something to say about life? Because after all, most ModPo people out there are not poetry experts and they're not academics. They're people who encounter poetry when they have a few minutes. Emily?
Yeah, well, I would assume that for most people, unless you're a very lucky or a very just determined person, that like meaning is not a given in your life. The way you feel about it changes, what you want from it changes, and even assigning something to meaning, like meaning to life, right? All those sort of sophomoric questions that we ask our children and still ask ourselves in more embarrassed ways when we get older. Means that life has no more of a fixed and stable meaning than the poetry we read, which is why reading something like The Way feels like, a poetic experience that mirrors the experience that you have as a person trying to understand what it means to be in the world.
It is a lot like living.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, encountering the way is a lot like the way we deal with the gray areas of our lives, yeah. Okay, good. Max, do you have a quick response to this issue? I know you think about this a lot.
Yeah, I love those last lines. Here's a small clearing here's the gasp of the small clearing come upon. Again, just that experience that you get reading the poem of coming to that clearing where things start to make sense, but then it kind of closes back in on you just as quickly. And I think that in and of itself is a far more useful model, I think, for approaching things in one's life, just having that idea. or kind of having that experience modeled for you in a poem of coming upon a clearing and having it close back on you, or having it sort of disappear behind you or something. It's a lot more, I don't know, if it's just that small, just that small sort of encounter experience seems more sustaining and useful in the long run than
useful in the long run.
Like a self-help book or something, you know?
Yeah, good, well put. Molly, do you want to add to this?
Sure. I think it's a choice to read a poem in a way that asks, what does this mean to me, rather than what is this about, what is it supposed to mean? And that's the same way you can live your life, shifting your perspective so that you can choose for yourself what every little action, every little encounter can mean. What is the possibility? What are the different ways of looking at it, rather than deciding what it's trying to tell you?
Choose for yourself what it means, which is obviously self-empowering and goes against the idea that there was a set thing that's supposed to be conveyed to you, which, by the way, is the assumption of most education. This counters the assumption of most education, which is that somebody has some material to convey to you and you're supposed to receive it and then do well on standardized testing, which conveys that you learned it, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that's a kind of education that could be supplemented by one where the interpreting self comes forward out of its receiving mode and begins to actively interact with the material it's being given, and then winds up, as Anna likes to say, doing the work, which is, by the way, not fun. It's actually quite fun, but doing the work of participating. I'm going to play Rae Armentrout reading the poem. That will close that little chapter, and then we'll go to Anna and someone on the phone, and we'll have Andrea and Jason respond to whatever the question is from the phone call. So here is Rae Armentrout performing The Way.
The Way. Card in pew pocket announces, I am here. I made only one statement because of a bad winter. Grease is the word, Greece is the way. I am feeling real-life emergencies or flubbing behind the scenes. As a child, I was abandoned in a story made of trees. Here's the small gasp of this clearing come upon again. The way.
How you say what you say is as important as what you say. The way that you take, the path, the going, is as important as what you get when you arrive. And when you arrive as a young reader in that memory, that beautiful memory, as far as I understand it, is a moment when you realize that your loving parent has taught you books and you've lost your way, Gretel-like, in a place where it's a world given to you by literature and you've lost it and you become a reader, and that's the portrait of the writer-artist as a young girl who's been liberated and also abandoned into a world made of trees, paper, books, pages. And there she is, and then she has this gasp of realization, and then the world of words closes in again. It's just, to me, very powerful and moving, and it's about process. Well, that was great. Okay, who do we have on the phone?
We have Shannon calling from Texas, and she says she has a hard question.
Uh-oh.
So
Shannon, okay,
get ready.
Okay, I'm ready. Shannon? Hi. Chris, can we get Shannon up a little louder? Shannon, is this Shannon Ratliff?
It is Shannon Ratliff.
Oh, Shannon. We're all
Hi, Shannon.
fans.
Hi, guys. How's everybody doing up there, y'all?
Great.
We're doing all
We're
right.
great.
You don't have to answer this in detail, but I think all of us who got to know you last year heard about various bumps in your road, speaking of the way. We all hope that things are smoother now. Are things a little easier for you?
I'm doing okay. I still have to use a stupid walker, but I've kind of learned how to do some karate chop Michael Jackson moves with it.
Whoa. I think Michael's going to have to sketch that. I don't know how you're going to sketch it since you're not saying. Wow, Shannon, that's cool. Take a picture sometime, a little video of you doing your Michael Jackson with a walker.
I learned how to moonwalk with it. It was quite fun.
Wow. Nice. That is hilarious. Okay, you have a difficult question, and Andrea, who is totally brilliant, totally brilliant, is going to answer, and then with a little help from Jason.
Okay.
So, fire away.
Hey, Andrea, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay. Okay, I'm working on a poem I did not do last year because it was too hard, called Dance Ruth.
Das Roos, yes.
Okay, and I did listen to the music you told us to do, Dr. Al.
Okay.
Okay, and this what I having struggle with. I am lonely. I was born to be lonely. I am best so. What the hell?
Okay. That is the question. What the hell? Andrea, do you want to text to the poem, or are you okay?
I think I'm okay.
Okay.
I have it on my phone too.
You have it on your phone?
Yeah.
You're so cool.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a really interesting part of that that poem, because it can be taken a number of different ways. I think just in the course of it, that, you know, is he really upset? Is this fake anguish? Is he feeling
bullshit?
Right? Is it? And I read it differently every time I go back to it, depending on my feelings toward William Carlos Williams at the moment, which shift, and also just in how I'm reading it. But what I think is so interesting about it is that this idea of loneliness, of being this kind of lonely genius in his household, is that he's, like in a lot of things in ModPo, reflecting in form what he's reflecting in content. So he's sort of doing this, oh, I'm so, woe is me, I'm here by myself, and I'm within this confine, I'm within this conventional, traditional suburbia, and I can't express myself except for in this quiet way in my, little room. And he's also doing it within kind of a traditional, like, format of poetry, where he's doing something really crazy within those confines, within those lines. He's busting out.
Maybe only in the lines, maybe not real, because it's all conditional. If
I do it. Yeah, exactly. So it might only be in his imagination.
Do you ever do if conditional wild stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I think before anything, and I think before anything wild becomes real, it's an if first, right? So even if you're going to enact it, it's an if when it starts.
I'm going to turn to Jason, but I keep remembering presidential candidate Jimmy Carter of Georgia, who's a very faithful religious person, admitting to, I think, Playboy. Why was he being interviewed by Playboy? But he admitted to Playboy that he lusts in his heart. And this got bent out of shape. And what he was saying was, I have an imagination of desire just like anyone else. He was saying it in the Christian context, which is to say, he was saying we're all sinners. William Carlos Williams is not saying it in the Christian context. But he's talking about the power of the imagination to do things that are unethical in the imagination. And he's not talking about the act of acting upon those desires. He's talking about the frustrations of imagining them so palpably. And so there's been some consternation from some quarters in the discussion forums about the ethics of this man. I don't think the poem really has anything to... There's a lot about William Carlos Williams that is ethically difficult and compromising, such as the way he led his life. And there's also an ethical problem of him having his wife and probably the nanny and the child sleeping while he's complaining of being lonely. I mean, what kind of dad is that? So there's things to go on, but I don't have a problem with him imagining that he's dancing naked against the yellow shades. I personally don't have a problem with that. Jason, lonely, no lonely. Answer Shannon's question. Here's Jason. And by the way, Jason's office hours are fabulous. Jason Zuzga, Z-U-Z-G-A. He's a poet. He's a genius. He's not a lonely genius right now because he's surrounded by us. And he doesn't dance naked against the window shades so far as we know. But maybe like everybody else, he thinks about it. Jason, what a setup.
Yeah, thank you.
And here's Jason. Anna's looking at me like, Al, you fucked up again. It's the caffeine. You're doing it to me.
Anna, why did you give him caffeine?
Anna, stop that.
Placebo caffeine.
Placebo caffeine. Jason, for once, is being very patient.
Yes. Hi, Shannon.
Hi, Jason.
I think also, in addition to what Andrea said, which is great, that it's important for us to remember that this is a poem, and that although there is the little line, and singing softly to myself, before that and after that, it's quite wild and quite exhibitionist, at least to the reader. So there is a kind of irony to I am lonely, lonely, I was born to be lonely, I am best so. In that last line, he certainly is not decrying or complaining about being lonely. He's saying he is best so. He's enjoying the fact, perhaps, that his wife, the baby, and Kathleen are sleeping, and he can finally be himself. So I think the repetition of lonely itself undoes almost the work of that word.
Yeah.
The word lonely isn't lonely. And certainly, not only, he's not singing softly to himself. He's writing a poem, and in the poem, it has this exclamation that is shared with the reader. So I think that that in a sense that the last question of the poem is an address to the reader who has just witnessed this.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Shannon, did you hear that?
Yes, I heard it, and that's what it makes. It doesn't make a sense, because before he's being crazy, after he's being crazy, but somehow in the middle, all of a sudden, I don't know, am I supposed to feel sorry for him? I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Shannon, thanks for the question. And I just want to say, and I know I'm speaking for all the ModPo people, we just love your being involved in this. And you're one of the many, you provide joy for those of us organizing and hosting and convening a massive open online course of thousands of geographically and otherwise diverse people. And you're one of those people, and we really love that you're with us. So, you know, do your Michael Jackson walker thing, and maybe dance naked against the shade in your mind.
Oh, good Lord. I've been so many times naked in the past 2 years at all, so I'm really not interested.
All right. Thank you, Shannon. Talk to you soon. Wow, that's Shannon.
Love you guys.
Love you guys. Love you too. Thank you. Wow. Julia, I'm going to read a couple of tweets. While I'm doing that, would you switch over to the forums and pick up a question from the forums? Okay. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and it looks like the Twitter feed, which uses hashtag ModPoLive, is really more of a conversation in the summary. It's a lot of people shouting to each other in a good way, like shouting out to each other. Erica retweets the way is like a collection of Easter eggs. John Butler, who probably should be at work, and John is a dear friend of mine, and he works for a think tank institute for legal work in New York, writes, Joe Massey and Sid Corman, good morning, listening in at work. Ray Maxwell then follows up with the text of It Isn't for Want. Karen Lanier, Sid Corman wanted to detain us with his poetry. Are you willing? Hell yes. Lots of good stuff going on. Therese from California, poetry is more like life, and so on and so forth. It's really fun to see you guys working. Mary Armour, who is in South Africa, has joined us, and so on. Julia, what do we have in the forums?
So there's a question that isn't about a specific poem, it's about the writing assignment. So Rizwana, I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, writes, I'm feeling nervous about the writing assignment. What am I supposed to write in it? The main idea, explanation of every line, my interpretation, comparing the poem with another poem. or something else.
All
So I
right.
think we should spend a couple of moments just briefly
Good.
discussing the writing assignment.
So why don't we ask Anna and Max, who have both reviewed their share, hundreds and hundreds of these essays over the years in ModPo, just a quick piece of advice from each of you, and then we'll ask Anna to do the same. Emily, what advice do you give to someone who's a little nervous about this assignment? Remember, the assignment is I Taste a Liquor Never Brewed, Emily Dickinson, a close reading of that in 500 words. Emily, where should they start? What shouldn't they worry about?
They shouldn't worry about being right. The entire exercise of close reading is to tease out a number of different and possible readings and to explore as much as possible. And if you're nervous, and you're unsure and tentative about your readings, well, you're going to get a lot of cool people responding to your essays in the forums. It will help you figure out where to go from there.
Great advice. Max?
I would qualify that a little bit. Yes, don't worry about being right, but also hew to the text. I think see what the text is telling you, and maybe don't overthink it in the sense that don't come with a preconceived notion or don't try to shoehorn an interpretation in. Just deal with the text, as Emily was saying. Tease out some meanings, see what's going on there, and play with the logic of the poem. And I think that's something that we have modeled well in our own Emily Dickinson videos, right? In terms of how you approach an Emily Dickinson poem. So I think just try to do that. See what the text is telling you. See what Emily Dickinson is trying to tell you.
Thank you, Max. Great suggestion. And in fact, we have close readings in the videos. I don't know if any of them are transcribed. I think they're all transcribed, or rather, you get subtitles. Use those as a model. See what happens. Anna, some thoughts on that?
I would just say just take a crack at it. It can be really intimidating at first. It can be scary at first, and it can feel like, oh my God, I'm doing this by myself, and I've seen it done in a group. Like, how am I going to do this all by myself? But you've got the tools because you have the poem, and that's really all you need. So just take a crack at it and see where it takes you.
Great. I want to ask Julia and Erica a question about this, and then Anna, we're going to go to the phone, and I would like to present with this caller with the new Gary Snyder book, which is a hardcover, and you'll be getting an address and mailing it. So Julia and Erica, from the point of view of reformist pedagogical thinkers, people who would like to, I was going to say improve, but change the way things are taught at all levels, not just university, do you have something to say about the grading, evaluation, the peer reviewing that will be a comfort to people in our system? What is it we're trying to do here, and why? Julia first?
So our emphasis in so-called evaluating your work, and we don't even use the word evaluating in the course, is to ask a series of questions of you to push your thinking further and push your writing further, and we invite you to ask questions of each other, most crucially. So what matters here most is the broader conversation that we're having about your close readings in these writing assignments.
And as a technical matter, Julia, you and I were responsible for this 4 years ago. ModPo was the first to do this and is one of the few MOOCs that does this. Your essays will be copied into the discussion forums automatically when they receive the first reviewer from within the module. And once that happens, it becomes a lot like the rest of the discussion forums, where you've just written a slightly more formal post to discussion forums, and people respond in all kinds of ways at length and briefly, just as if it's part of the discussion. I think all teachers who are teaching a course in which the paper gets, the essays get integrated into the discussion, find that people relax more when they realize that it's a lot like the conversation that we're having. Erica, your thoughts, and feel free to be grand and big and reformist in saying this. You don't have to talk about the details.
Well, I think that one of the things that we're doing is we're modeling a way of supportive feedback and of creating an atmosphere where you're not thinking about evaluation. The idea of writing an essay is really about entering into an interesting and exciting conversation with a lot of other people thinking about the same things.
Exactly, and I'll just add that although we're not giving grades of any kind, experiments that have been done with large, basically massive open communities, comparing how peer reviewing works to the evaluations given by individual teachers. The jury is still out on this, and I'm not a huge fan of schools of education. Apologies to those of you out there who are part of official schools of education at universities, but the studying that they're doing is suggesting that the wisdom of crowds, so-called, collectively winds up with a very similar judgment. We're not doing those kind of judgments here, but we're trying to create the atmosphere in which that would be the case. So that if I were somehow multiplied by 20,000 and I could evaluate everybody's paper, everybody's essay, the result of the peer reviewing in aggregate would be about the same as what I would say in terms of evaluation. That's really threatening to the institutions that have supported specific teacher evaluations. Very threatening, in a way I think that is very, very heartening, because because crowds do have wisdom if they're focused, if they're encouraged to be civil, if people who are working at the margins of opinions are included rather than excluded and banished, people who say untoward or difficult things to challenge the community are included rather than excluded, then you get a diversity of responses, and if you create a tolerant community of evaluators, then the evaluation turns out to be more helpful. And I would say that those of you who are going to get 4, 5, 6, and 7 responses to your essays will look back on your experience as undergrads at Ohio State University or one of the California schools or the University of Toronto or goodness gracious, certainly in the British system and the European system where it's very different. I think you're going to look back at your own college career and see that the paper you wrote in a 250-person class received a quick TA, all due respect to TAs, TA check, couple of check marks, and maybe a numerical evaluation or a letter grade, and a couple of quick remarks on some grammatical problems, and compare that to the 7 or 8 responses you get from your ModPo peers who are doing it voluntarily, and you wind up saying that you got more responsiveness to this from this so-called massive open online course, which is much belittled by educators as you know, sort of thin and not very useful educationally. You're going to get more of a response from us if you participate in this project seriously. You know, up with the MOOC experiment. Anna, we have someone on the phone who's going to receive Zach Gary Snyder's book, This Present Moment. There we are. Brand new, hardcover. Anna, who is it?
I am so excited. It's Colleen Knight,
who's
been, if you've been in the forums this week, she's been spectacular in the forums.
Yeah.
I am really excited to hear what she has to say. She's calling
Great.
from Toronto.
Colleen Knight from Toronto. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Al?
Great. Really love your participation in the forums. Who the heck are you?
I'm some woman who lives just east of Toronto.
You're some woman who what?
Lives just east of Toronto.
Oh, okay, good. How did you find ModPo? What the heck?
I belong to a writers' organization out here, and I was introduced to it by Ingrid Ruthig.
Ingrid is a community TA.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks to Ingrid for turning you on to ModPo. What's it like so far?
It's amazing. It's my second year, and I'm already garnering so much more than I did the first year.
Great. Do you have a question for us?
I do. I found that I was a woman defending a male poet's promiscuity in the forums.
I noticed that. It was very heroic.
Pardon me?
I noticed that you were doing that, and I found it to be very heroic.
Oh, thank you. So I'm speaking specifically to William Carlos Williams' poem, Smell, and I'm just wondering why no one has dared to touch this one yet, in terms of it being uncomfortable and controversial. I find it highly sexual, and I'm wondering why it's still an uncomfortable topic today.
Oh, that's such a great question. Do you mind staying on the line, because I'd love your response?
Sure.
Okay, so Juliet Block, who's sitting to my left, has thought a lot about Williams, and it's complicated, as they say, and Lily, too. So why don't I ask the two of you to respond, and then anybody else, you know, Emily, Erica, if you want to add something. Can we swap and bring Mary in to the table? Do you mind, Mary? I mean, you don't have to answer this question, but it would be good to have you here. And we'll get you a chair. So since Julia's doing chair stuff, Lily, do you want to start with smell?
Sure.
Or Williams in general?
Well, I think.
Thank you, Andrea.
So if the question, so I guess it's an uncomfortable topic because it's just like a very frank discussion of desire, and like the tradition of poetry is, if you're thinking of like a sort of like a romantic tradition or whatever, is to kind of like hide your desire in all these like more lofty ways or make it seem like this sort of divine, really lovely thing. But he's talking about desire in a way that maybe people actually experience it, which is like it's base and kind of gross or whatever, but like also he loves it. So it's kind of it breaks with a poetic tradition in terms of talking about desire, and he's talking about not a specific woman that he loves and is elevating. He's just talking from a sort of a selfish perspective of his own desire and how both sort of like mock chastising himself for how disgusting he is, but actually he doesn't really think he's disgusting.
Julia, your thoughts?
Yeah, Williams is a poet who's really interested in what's productive about decay and festering, and so there's a lot of decay and festering in this poem, and as Lily said, a lot of kind of self-recrimination over these base desires, but there's also kind of reveling in it. And I've always really loved this poem because of its deep physicality, and it refuses to idealize the body, and it's embracing the grotesque, much like he does in Dans Russe.
So, what's your reaction when people decry it as misogynist and
Williams is a misogynist.
Yeah, I was going to say, agree.
I'm deeply indebted to his poetry, as many of us are, and Alice Notley is someone who's written perceptively about this, about what it means to inherit Williams's line and also need to speak out against his intense misogyny and racism. And yet, you don't need to follow that by an and yet. There's an and that follows that. That's part of the difficulty of grappling with so much of this material, because there's something formally in the poem that exposes the cracks in its foundation, I guess, in a way. There's a kind of a brutal honesty to the poem about its misogyny and about its problematic politics.
Colleen, did you hear all that?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
What do you think?
What do I think? I have difficulty considering him a misogynist. I have a problem with that word because I'm actually not a misandrist. And I realize that women are this way too, and it's quite stereotypical to judge a man for being promiscuous. And I'm wondering if there's a poem, something like this, written by a woman that I may come across.
So I would suggest that as to that last question, that you post that to the forum somewhere where we'll all notice it and we can start accumulating a bibliography of this. But I like to go back to the first point that Lily made, which is that he is trying, for better or worse, to interrupt a literary tradition in which everybody looks at the spring and says, "Oh, it's so beautiful," and I feel like writing a poem. I mean, starting with the Canterbury Tales, and much earlier, that vernal return is always thought of as, white lilies at Easter. And Williams is saying, I like the fecundity of the early, pulpy, messy, ugly spring, when winter gives way to spring. I like pre-birth. He likes birthing. He likes there are many poems about delivering babies. And there's that kind of, the vernix on a newborn baby. He doesn't want to wipe that off. He wants that to be what the baby is. The baby is born into a cold world, what he called a new world naked. And that is a new aesthetic. If you couple that with the misogyny of the person, of the man, then the two issues can get very confused. What seems to be a literary radicalism is part of an ethical conservatism or a tradition which is hateful, and it's a really difficult combination to deal with. Colleen Knight from Toronto, you're going to get Gary Snyder's California Poems.
Woohoo!
Yeah, all right. Thank you for calling, and thank you for being part of ModPo.
Thank you kindly.
That's great. So, Julia, what are you seeing in the forums? Maybe we can throw a question at Mary and Molly and Dave.
Yeah, just give me a second.
Okay, great. So this might be a good time, although Anna is taking Colleen's address, this might be a good time for Anna to ballyhoo the meetups, and I'll start until she's off the phone. So congratulations to the group in Goshen, Indiana, at the Electric Brew. They had a meeting the other day that was great, organized by Ann Hostetter, who's one of our community TAs. On October 17th at Grogan's in Dublin, just go to the Ireland group, and they are working out a meetup there on October 17th. In Alexandria, Virginia, on Sunday, September 26th. That's this coming Sunday, 2 p.m.
27th, probably.
So it's actually probably the 27th.
Yeah, I think the 26th is Saturday.
Okay. So it's on Sunday at 2 p.m. in Alexandria. So this is the DC group. You can go there. We have our LA meetup Saturday at 11 a.m. Local time there. And Lily and Molly and I will be there. Did I miss somebody else is going to be there?
Paige, the community TA, will be there.
Paige, the community TA. Max will repeat in a minute, his Chicago group. And September 30th, our next live webcast. Each year we attempt to do a live webcast. This whole crazy setup with Zach and Chris, this is hard enough to do here. We're going on the road to Poet's House in New York, and that's a week from tomorrow, next Wednesday, September 30th. What time does it begin? Does anybody remember? 6 p.m. maybe?
7:30.
Could be at 7:30. Would somebody look at it while I'm talking? It's on the
7 p.m.
7 p.m.
And people don't have to RSVP, correct?
You don't have to RSVP. Just come to Poet's House. But here I'm talking to everyone, so this is a kind of combo, a meetup in New York, but also a webcast for everyone. So join us from Poet's House. We hope we did it from the Folger Library in Washington. Boy, was that a technical challenge.
Will there be anything here?
So we won't be here at all. So you'll be able, if you're a Philly guy, you'll want to stay at home and watch on your computer, and we'll be in New York. But come on to New York. It's not very far. Thank you, Michael. Julia, something for Mary and maybe Molly and Dave?
There's a question that CJ posed in the discussion forum.
And CJ is right here. Why don't we give him the mic?
Would you be willing to ask it in the mic, into the
I
mic?
would just, I think about, meta poetry.
The limits of meta poetry.
So it's a follow-up. And so let's do a quick follow-up to that. It is, CJ, an ongoing question in ModPo. I mean, just meta poetry is going to bug you the entire time. I don't mean bug you. It's going to follow us all the entire time, so it's good to have this conversation now. Do you want to follow up briefly?
I'm just trying to delimit or figure out the strengths and weaknesses of the idea. Sort of, you know, what are the biases, limits, blinders that may be incurred in metapoetic readings?
Meaning interpreting poems as being about poetry or as being about the poem itself.
Yeah, does that bias the reading or block it in other ways, or
good question.
You know, what are the dangers of going that route?
Okay. So let me just respond to lay out some of the issues, and then I'll ask Dave and Molly and then Mary to respond in that order. First of all, I'd say that ModPo is a course on modernist poetics that leads to contemporary or postmodern poetics. So that we are going to, so our selection, the syllabus, is a syllabus of experimental works. And one of the basic tenets of modernism is self-referentiality, is the idea that the poem is not a thing but a poem, that words are words and not things. And so naturally there is a tendency to foreground poems about poetry because that's the lineage, that's the way this thing goes, from Dickinson in particular forward. So if you were going to take a course, there's another course offered by, I'm blanking on his name, the former poet laureate, a really nice guy in Boston.
Pinsky.
Robert Pinsky. You're going to find very few metapoems in the Pinsky course. So as a balance to ModPo, which is all about modernist self-referentiality and language, the importance of language and form, so that every poem has to acknowledge at some point that it's a poem, right? Almost every poem. The balance would be to read a different. We have one Frost poem, and it's the Frost that refers to itself, Mending Wall. There's a lot of Frost that refers to the meadow and the field and the apple tree. That's not what ModPo is. So you want to go elsewhere for that. So there is, you are totally right, that as you read this poem, you think, my goodness, is there anything but meta poetry? On the other hand, the consciousness that a poem is a poem is in almost everything that a poet writes, as opposed to some novels, you know, which some Dickens novels, some Samuel Richardson novels, where there is this naivete, deliberate naivete. You know, what I'm writing is actually about, you know, this person, and this is a group of people who are out there, and you're not in a novel, you're in reality. And ModPo isn't doing that. So it limits us if there's nothing else to do but find the metapoetry. It's totally crippling, and that's why it's important for you to ask these questions. We have to do more than that. And if ModPo people are unable to see that Sid Corman might be writing about his friend or his wife, it isn't for want of something to say. I have something to say to you. I have something to say to you, and I want to detain you. I want to be here with you in the room. And if we're losing the fact that it might be a love poem, we're less for it. We in ModPo go straight to the more difficult reading, which is he's talking to us as readers. And so this is the issue, and we don't intend to limit the reading. In fact, because ModPo is dedicated to openness, we want to hear all readings, including the reading that Sid Corman is writing about a friend. And Lorraine Niedecker, when she is thanking someone for holding her fishing pole, she may actually be nothing more than thanking her friend, her husband Al, or some other friend. Up with Al. But she also may be expressing her self-reliance poetically, which certainly is characteristic of her work. And so ModPo goes right to that. And maybe you're saying we kind of go too quickly to that, and we create a kind of ideology of meta-poetry, which is foreclosing other options, and we don't mean to do that. So I went on too long about that, and I apologize. Dave Poplar, and then Molly, and then Mary on this topic. Dave?
Well, when you get meta, you really go to another level. I think it's not just another reading. I think it's something qualitatively different. You're taking a step back. So I don't think you can say it's just another reading. It has limitations and benefits, but it's something just absolutely different. It's almost like apples and oranges. And this is a pretty lame analogy, but if you take history...
Wait a minute, you're about to do a lame analogy? Dave Poplar, is it about baseball or football?
No, it's not. It's about history, where you can study an event. Say you could study a battle in a war, and you could study it and know everything there is to know about that battle and interpret it in a lot of different ways. But then you can take a step back and see how that battle really fit in to the war, or fit into the historical context, what was going on in the political realm. And in that sense, you're not just seeing the battle differently, but you're putting it in a completely different context. And that doesn't take away from what you know about the battle. It just adds to it and gives you a fuller interpretation.
Thank you. Molly, you want to talk about meta-poetry?
Sure.
I mean, one thing you might add, Molly, if you want to, is, there's an assumption, I don't think CJ is making this assumption, I'm not saying that at all, CJ, but I think some people assume that the meta-poetic reading is academic, and it's dry, and it's theoretical, and it's too fancy. I actually would claim, CJ, that the meta-poetic reading is the emotional reading, especially in a poem like Sid Corman or Lorraine Niedecker and Emily Dickinson, for goodness sakes. That woman dwelt in possibility, and the volcano is inside her, and it is a powerful thing to be a writer whose power derives from the pen hitting the page. That's, to me, a very emotional power that I don't get from a non-meta reading. Molly, I know you react to the meta-poetry that way, which is why I said that.
Well, I don't know if that's exactly how I see it. I guess I view the metapoetic reading as a strategy, as a sort of go-to point that if I can't get anything else from the poem and I can't figure out where it's trying to go, I can ask, what is it saying about writing? And then not only are we getting a deeper understanding or some kind of understanding of the poem itself, but we're also getting an understanding of writing itself on a larger and more complex level, and that's what I really like about it.
Great. Thank you, Molly. Mary, any thoughts on this?
I think that all of these points are really valid, and I agree with them all. And I see it as two different things going on at the same time, and you don't necessarily have to choose one over the other. Looking at the subject of the poem and enjoying it that way, or then that step back, as Dave Poplar said, and noticing the metapoetic moments. I like to think about it. You brought up the novel, and I really think that there's a certain amount of honesty that goes on, and I like to think about it in terms of documentary film and how there was a time where there was an eye of God and of like a narrator saying in these newsreels like, this is what's going on, and then it shifted and you started to have handheld cameras and you saw that camera shake and you were aware of somebody holding the camera.
The fact that it's a film being made by someone.
Exactly, the fact that it's a film being made by someone.
Yeah.
And I think in almost all the arts you can find that moment of self-referentiality happening in modernism.
That's brilliant. For those of you struggling with understanding what metapoetry is, and that's not the question here, because I think CJ understands exactly what we're talking about, but for those who find it hard to grasp, imagine that there is a set of devices and forms and language uses that are the equivalent of the handheld camera, which is a signal that this is a thing being made, right?
Yeah.
A poem is something that's made of words, it's constructed of words, and every phrase or every line or every poem has to indicate that this is not something that's easy and smooth and simply fallen from the sky. It is made by someone. And I think that's really important. And the film thing, Lily and I are teaching a course on genocide this afternoon, and one of the issues that we're facing with this, the students respond very happily to Schindler's List by Steven Spielberg, is that it uses that Olympian, everything is exactly duplicated, pseudo-documentary as a way of saying this is what evil is, or this is what goodness is, this is what happened to people. Whereas I want a film that includes the fact that there are many perspectives at once, that the camera is very shaky, that we don't know how to respond to something so deeply tragic, and that the been there, done that perfect quality of the Schindler's List, that's a different kind of poem. I want a poem that accounts for the fact that we cannot know, that we do not know, that we struggle to know, and that there are many, many voices. So when Rae Armentrout atomizes the subjectivity into many different subjects in that poem, it can drive us all crazy, but what she's saying is, there's all kinds of responses to the idea of being here. I want to invite, as we wrap up, usually I just do final words and we go around, but I want to invite anybody to say anything further on this topic or anything at all, and we're going to start with Anna and then Jason, and we're going to go around to everybody in the Google Hangouts and Lily and Julia, and then I'm going to wrap up with a shout out or two. So you got to be really brief. Anna, you first.
I think my personal favorite thing about the invitation to the metapoetic reading is that in the metapoetic reading, I find my invitation to participate in the process of making meaning and in the process of interpretation from the poet. I feel this tension, this moment of the poet reaching out to me, especially with Sid Corman, especially with I believe it's a ModPo Plus poem that we don't see, but it's a William Carlos Williams poem called Portrait of a Lady.
No, it's in
oh, it's in there? It's in main syllabus?
Yeah, it's when we get to the Williams Week.
Yeah. So, good, coming up. And in the Rae Armentrout as well, in the way, like you see this moment where the poet is reaching out to you and saying, I wrote this poem for you, reader. Come on in and let's see what we can do with it.
Co-creation.
Yeah.
Great. Jason, very quickly, further thought on this?
Yeah, I think that what the poet has to work with are words as their materials, and in the way that a painter can draw attention to the materiality of paint, or choose not to create.
Or choose not to.
Right. That in a way, after you read metapoetically, the poem that seems to be a window onto an event the window itself becomes apparent. So it flips around and changes the way that one looks at poems that seem less referential.
Yeah, good way to put it. And CJ, as the course goes on, you're going to see in chapter 3 in particular, there's a whole series of chapters before we get to the beats, of chapters of poets who have concerns about this. Some of them are social, political, and ethical concerns. So the communist poets of chapter 3 are going to say, look, the world's falling apart in the Depression here. Stop talking about poetry. How about if we start talking about hunger and starvation and eviction? And so I think some of the communist poets called out the modernists like Stein and said, God, you're self-involved. And I think there is a critique of the modernist self-involvement that is relevant. And we're going to hear that for sure as we go on. Dave Poplar, and then Emily, Erica, Max, and Molly. Very quickly, final word of any kind or further word on this.
Just a quick word on metapoetry. One of the things I like about it is it's really not just about poetry. It's really about seeing the world differently, and it forces us to do something that we might not be accustomed to doing.
Yeah, well put. Emily Harnett?
Yeah, well, I just remember when I was a little bit younger, I used to think that there was something kind of maybe self-absorbed or self-obsessed about metapoetry. And then I had the ModPo experience, and I don't think that anymore. But I think one of the things that's wonderful about this type of craft, about this aesthetic experience, is it produces this self-awareness as an artistic object. And I think models something like self-awareness for people and the way we live our lives, the way that we talked about with The Way and Rae Armentrout.
Great. I love that. Self-awareness as itself one of the topics, one of the issues. Erica Kaufman?
As far as metapoetry goes, I'm thinking about the conversation that we had at the Meetup this weekend about Danse Russe as perhaps a meta-poetic or meta-metapoetic even kind of poem. And how the fact that it is that is what makes it successful.
Yeah, that's cool. If it weren't a meta poem, it would be a weird guy dancing in the attic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we would, right? I don't think we'd be talking about it. Yeah, no, that's good. I love that. That's Erica. Oh man, what a teacher you are. Max, thoughts on this?
I think any work of art that engages in a pre-established mode, form, or genre is always already about that genre. So, I mean, the novel has always already been about novels. That's why it's such a good example. Like Don Quixote, considered the earliest novel in the West, is about novels. The sequel has the characters reading the novel about themselves, or whatever. That's pretty crazy. Same thing with Richardson and Fielding and stuff in English. Every pop song is, by obeying the conventions of pop songwriting, is about the pop song. The thing with, I think why metapoetry is such a challenge here with these poems is that we have poems that seem to be departing from an established tradition or convention, but that are still trying to stake a claim to poetry. So the challenge then posed to us is how are these poems about poems when they don't seem to be poems in the traditional way that we understand poems to be about? And I think that's the challenge for us, and I think the imperative to read metapoetically is to try to, in this case, expand the definition of poetry. How can these poems still be poems while not resembling poems in the traditional sense?
Yeah, that's such a great setup for the rise of modernism. If Marcel Duchamp goes into a hardware store and picks out a urinal, and it's not metapoetic, a metapoetic gesture, then it's just a toilet, right? And if it were just a toilet, ick. You know, and also the whole notion of authorship and making is a problem. Molly, your thought on this or anything?
Sure. I'm just glancing at the Webcast forums, and there are a lot of people speaking about enjoying their emotional and gut reactions and not wanting to read for the metapoetic reading. And I just want to suggest that maybe your gut reaction to a poem can be a clue to what the poet is trying to do in terms of, you know, educating us or saying something bigger about the work itself, and to listen to that and be with it.
Yeah, that's great. It's the hegemony of the radical avant-garde. If you go into a museum or a gallery and there's a urinal there turned upside down and signed, and you begin saying, I resist this kind of art, you've done exactly what that work of art wanted you to do, which is to try to understand what the limits of art as a category are, and now you're part of the conversation about whether meta art is art. So you can't really, CJ, it's a slippery slope. I know you wanted to respond. Let's get him a mic so that he can say it. It's going to have to be brief because we got to wrap up. But let's go to Lily first.
I think that the thing with meta poetry is like, if we start reading a poem and the only place that we get by the end is like, it's about writing, period, and then we just move on like that was a conclusion somehow that we like that was it, then that's a problem. So I think it's not just learning how to read a poem metapoetically. It's like taking that reading and then maybe looking at the rest of their work, looking at their personal like looking and seeing how we can expand out from that into our real world. Because if we just keep reading poems that are about writing and nothing else happens with that conclusion, then it will actually just stay super referential and insular.
It'll be oppressive,
Yeah.
which is one of the concerns that CJ has, that we have no choices. CJ, do you want to respond briefly? I know there's a lot going on.
Well,
we can continue this conversation.
I'm not opposed to meta poetry. In fact, I almost may like it in the sense that no, seriously. But I'm resisting it because I don't understand. I'm trying to grapple with it. I wonder if it's kind of metaphysics of language. A metaphysics, the universe is communication, perhaps. And if metapoetry is perhaps taking that metaphysical stance, I might actually be one of its foremost supporters. But I'm grappling with trying to grapple.
It's a great conversation to be having, and we're indebted to you for raising it. It's a great way to end this particular webcast. Julia, and then I'm going to have to wrap up. So, Julia?
I really like what Lily said. I'm going to paraphrase Lily a little bit, because what I heard her saying was that reading for metapoetry is about reading the language in the world and reading the writing in the world and seeing what the poem is saying about what writing has to do with the world. And so along that vein, and going back to Williams, I just want to put a plug in for a recording from 2008 that you can find on the Kelly Writers House website calendar, devoted to William Carlos Williams and the women. So it's 4 poets talking about women in Williams's poetry and femaleness and how to read Williams as a feminist, and how to deal with this all the problems of the women in his work in the way that we've been discussing today, in a way that is quite metapoetic.
And you were part of that.
I was not.
Oh, you weren't.
But I've used it in my classrooms many times.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to thank a few people and then shout out to conclude. Dave Poplar, thank you very much. Emily, good to see you. Erica Kaufman, go back to that fabulous Hudson River hideout of yours called Bard College. Max McKenna, great to see you again as always. Molly, we'll see you in Los Angeles Saturday at 11 o'clock. Lily, as always, such a pleasure to work with you all the time. Anna Strong, thank you for dealing with the phones. We're going to rotate. Yes?
I just want to say one more thing about our meetups, briefly. First of all, to those of you who are working so hard to schedule things, thank you so much, and please keep at it. If you go to the calendar now, we have tons of meetups that are there that that Zach and I have been working on collecting and putting there. We got LA this weekend. The DC crew is meeting up 2 places. October, we've got Max in Chicago. Ellen Dillon in Ireland is putting something together.
Yeah, while you were on the phone, I went through these.
Yeah, so that's awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. And if you see there's a pinned thread that says post here if you've actually scheduled one, put it there so that I make sure that I see it, because I don't want to miss any. So thank you guys so much for doing that. We really, really appreciate it, and keep at it.
And Anna and Zach are putting together a calendar of these things, so you can go to one calendar and see it all. And thanks, Chris Martin and Zach Gardner. This was a perfect webcast technically. We really, really... No, it wasn't? What?
Yeah, don't say that yet. Don't say that yet.
It's so funny. I'm telling you, this is a real science. Mary and Andrea, thank you for coming to the table. Lexa, Kirby, Michael, CJ, Herb, Philip Drexler, Colleen Knight calling from Toronto, Shannon calling from Texas. We love you all. Thank you. And there were others who called. Two shout-outs, first of all, to those who care about the ModPo Facebook group, which now has 7,509 members, which is ridiculous. This is a community unto itself. It goes 12 months of the year. I'm really grateful for people who care about that place. It is the nicest, probably the only really nice place that, in my experience, on Facebook, which tends to be kind of a crazy place. And everybody is civil there, and people keep it going, and it's probably a good instance of how ModPo is just an ongoing, cumulative community. And speaking of community, I just want to shout out to the community TAs. I'm not going to read all of their names, just a few of them, but if you see them in the forums, these are volunteers. These are people who got into ModPo. There are a few of them in the room here. They got into ModPo. They didn't want to end when it was ended. They're all volunteers, I stress. They are volunteering their time. They're extremely helpful. And if you talk to some people like Julia and me, who in the first year we were answering questions about the essays, and we were looking for people who accidentally plagiarized and copied things. We were hunting people down to try to get them to, I don't know, do something that fit with the, and there were all kinds of problems with the platform. We were one of the very first Coursera MOOCs, and it was crazy. And the presence of the community TAs has meant that those of us who are committed to doing this, which as you can see is quite a tremendous amount of work, are able to spread the work around so that we get a lot of support. Sean O'Brien, who is not a community TA, put up a community TAs sub-forum, and that's where the community TAs are introducing themselves, and the community TAs deserve thanks, and they get a lot of it there. And I'm just going to shout out to a couple of them, a few of them, not everyone, and I apologize for missing people. Mark Snyder, Andrea, who's right here, who's a probably the longest-serving community TA, Treva Stos, Mark Drexler, T. De Los Reyes, who is our all-night person because she's in Manila or the Philippines, and she covers the when we're all sleeping. Alan Keaton, Ray Maxwell, Max Heron, Karen Elenier, Carol Stephen in Canada, Ian Chowcat, who I think is in Northern England or maybe Ireland, who's a educational activist and theorist and reformer, Therese Pope in California, Massimo Saranzio, who's I believe I don't think he's a teacher actually in Italy. He does some other kind of job that I think he likes his ModPo better than his job. Christina Rao, Ingrid Ruthig, the aforementioned, Eric Allen Weinstein, who's here usually, Mary Armour in South Africa, Matt Corey, who I believe is in Chicago and maybe Texas, I'm not sure, Nicola Quinn, who is in like Cornwall, southwest England somewhere, who's terrific. Bill Spear, of course, from the middle of the country. I think he's from Missouri. Arkansas, so sorry, you're right, Arkansas. Jeremy Dixon, who's maybe from Wales. Alison Borkowska, who's known as Borkowska, who we met. Alison, who's a academic, got a full-time academic job at Penn State. J.C. Kamji, Nadia Gent, Mary Hardwick, Ann Hostetler, Virgil Houston, Sharon Ingraham, Juan Pablo Lasso in South America, Julie Nasland, Mary Abrupta, who's right here, Jim Ritter, who's in L.A., we're going to see him, Emily Wilmarth, who's in, I think, in Sweden or Denmark, Anthony Watkins, isn't he hilarious, Holly York, who is an eminent academic at Emory University, who's just helping, and so many more. Thank you all. You are fantastic. You are making this a community effort, and it makes it possible. We are going to be able to continue ModPo from here on because of you. So thank you. And we're going to go out with it's Sid Corman, It Isn't for Want, and I want to try to interpret this poem as about you, meaning us, meaning the people who receive this. These are the people who keep, as was reminded by Joe Massey, these are the people who keep Sid Corman alive. He is because we are, right? He is because there's thousands of people who are listening to him. Here's Sid Corman. We're going to go out the next time we see you live. It's going to be from New York City. Someday it's going to be a great town, New York, at Poet's House. See you guys. Here's Sid.
All right. It isn't for want of something to say, something to tell you, something you should know, but to detain you. Keep you from going, feeling myself here as long as you are, as long as you are.
and ModPo people, you are. Thank you for being R. Thank you for R-ing. Thank you for being. Bye-bye, everybody. We'll see you next time.